Tonight, we are tracking an escalation from the January 6th committee. This was breaking late today. It involves Trump White House vet Peter Navarro, who was so vocal about trying to overthrow the election that many legal experts said he opened himself up to a potential formal subpoena, though he recently told us he had not at the time gotten one.
Here they are poised to probably subpoena Jordan, Perry, Navarro.
Congratulations, Peter Navarro. I think you've just earned yourself a subpoena.
Will his be the next subpoena to drop from the January 6th Select Committee?
Has the House probe requested your cooperation?
No.
No. And that no came about 2 weeks ago. Navarro's admissions about trying to overthrow the election came about 4 weeks ago, right here on the beat. The news tonight is the January 6th committee just subpoenaed Navarro, pressing him to go under oath about his confessed plot. This committee's new letter asked Navarro to come in, provide evidence and testimony about his work with Steve Bannon, these plots to challenge the election, what they called this Green Bay sweep or a coup, which he outlined, among other things that the committee wants to know. That sweep or coup is the centerpiece of the failed Navarro-Bannon plot to create doubt about the results, what he told us about. They wanted to try to use that to compel Vice President Pence to then claim that Pence could somehow stop the finalizing of Trump's loss, which was lawful and complete. Under questioning, Navarro cast that effort to end democracy as a kind of a optional end run that he could focus on 6 states where Trump lost.
We had over 100 congressmen and senators on Capitol Hill ready to implement the sweep. We were going to challenge the results of the election in the 6 battleground states. Most or all of those states would decertify the election. That would throw the election to the House of Representatives. The election was still in doubt. We were following the Constitution and rules of the Senate to simply get a recount of what the votes were.
Do you realize you are describing a coup?
No.
That was just part of the admissions Navarro has made, both in that interview and in public. This new subpoena here, which is out tonight, demands that he testify about the claim that over 100 members of Congress were in on it and that Trump was on board. The committee wants documents by February 23rd and a deposition on March 2nd. And these are escalations in the probe of a multifaceted plot to steal the election. Let's be clear. Bannon, now indicted, and Navarro, now under subpoena, they call it a sweep. Other experts see a coup. Now, will Navarro comply or resist, risking more legal jeopardy? Well, I'll show you this. We'll put this back up on the screen because the committee in the new letter here accompanying the subpoena notes he has not been shy in detailing his efforts. Quote, "You've already discussed these issues in interviews with reporters. We look forward to discussing them with you, too." And there you have it. That is as close to shade as a formal congressional investigation gets. And they are saying something that many people have noticed. The plotting, the efforts to both lie about the outcome, to get others to lie about it in potentially criminal ways, and to overthrow the election in the past is not something that has remained a secret or a plot. It has more looked like an advertisement, and that is dangerous for many reasons, including whether it is a dry run to normalize this in a more effective way in the future. Now, we have more of a breakdown here because, as you may have noticed, the beat has been all over this story. We're going to get into it. But first, I want to bring in, for immediate breaking news reaction, former federal prosecutors Joyce Vance and John Flannery, and journalist Josh Marshall. John, your reaction to this development?
I think it's a big development, because what we do is we have a man making such admissions in a book, a Rolling Stone interview, and you really closed the case on him when you got him basically to say, this is how we were going to do it. And you just said, well, that's a coup. And it was because of 2 particular reasons. One is they talk about law that is not law, and they talk about facts that are not facts, meaning that there are states, including the battleground states, that have any objection at all to the electors that were chosen. And what they hoped to do was to, I think, cause the disturbance, the physical and violent disturbance, but at the same time to have a series of votes on supposed states that had reservations and make each of those a 4-hour extravaganza. So there'd be 24 hours. And then I think they hope by exhaustion they could send it back to the states that would either certify or decertify. Their plan was they would force the people to decertify. They'd bring it back.
Right.
And then they would steal the election. Sorry to go on so long, but that was, I think, their plot. And the Green Bay sweep was to wipe it across, to have all these 100 senators and representatives in on the deal. So each of them is exposed to criminal obligations. The real question is, will the Justice Department do something about it? Because they've been sleepy before.
The January 6th committee wants to know more than one thing from Navarro. They want him under oath about the sweep, as we've been discussing. It's been 36 days since he admitted that here on The Beat. But there's been other newer reporting also emerging about that fraudulent electors plot in states that Trump lost. There were Trump aides like Giuliani and Epstein who pushed that. They're also now under subpoena. So you remember there's more than one piece of pressure. And the whole idea was to give Pence another reason to try to cast doubt on the states that Biden won. So this committee might want to know if Navarro's plot for January 6th also coordinated with the fraudulent electors plot, which was aimed at Congress. As John Flannery was just asking, what did those 100 members of Congress who were supposedly in on this, what exactly were they in on? Did they know that this might intersect with rampant attempted elector and voter fraud?
We had over 100 congressmen and senators on Capitol Hill ready to implement the sweep. We believe that if the votes were sent back to those battleground states, that most or all of those states would decertify the election. Senator Ted Cruz and Gosar, a representative, started the Green Bay sweep beautifully.
Do you realize you are describing a coup?
No, we were following the Constitution. And
the issue you raised in terms of fraudulent elector certifications is our prosecutors are looking at those.
That last line is recent, the Deputy Attorney General confirming a criminal probe. Now, Navarro seems convinced of his vocal approach, where he is the source of some of the very best evidence against him right now, amplified on air. Now, it may seem downright bizarre, but this is not actually unprecedented. As one legal text put it, quote, never knew hustlers confessed on video. Watch what comes out your mouth can make a tight case for the DA from here to down south. Say you're a player, but only because you be playing yourself. That's wisdom from Kendrick Giroux Davis all the way back to 1996, and it may still apply. Our panel returns. I want to go to Flannery as a prosecutor and then Josh, but I quote that because it refers to something known in the law, which is you might be surprised how many people accused of crimes are the source of some of the best evidence against themselves.
Often when a client comes to you, you ask the question, so did you talk to anybody? And often they say no. I don't think they understand the question. And then you find out they talked for 6 hours and they signed a statement and they initialed it and they took people to the site of the crime and they showed them the documents and they gave them their passwords and everything else. I came from a neighborhood in which if the uncle on the beat was known to you, you wouldn't have talked to him. We knew the rules of the road, but a lot of people don't, especially first time and especially in white collar cases. But these guys are arrogant because nothing's happened to anybody else. And I think they do this figuring we have to win this because that's how we get out of this. So we can do anything. And you had that clip when I appeared the last time, I believe, in which Bannon and Navarro was saying, oh, we're unreasonable people. Yes, we create a chaos. It's unreasonable. We confuse the argument. We normalize things that everybody used to know was a crime, and then we go forward. So, and Joyce made a good point about, do you give immunity to someone? And as prosecutors, we think in that way. But on the Hill, it's a dangerous thing. If you remember Ollie North, he got immunity from the Senate. He was convicted on trial afterwards, and on appeal, they threw it out because they viewed that the immunity he got on the Hill precluded the prosecution. So it's very dangerous. And that's why Justice Department involvement is critical, and it hasn't happened yet.
So, Josh, widening beyond just the legalities of this, there's a subpoena, there's pressure, Bannon's under indictment. You followed all of this. It's not as if nobody's ever gotten in trouble. There's serious felonies, there's trials coming. What do you see in the way that the committee is tracking something that relates to the health of our democracy ongoing?
what we've seen with Navarro there, it's a classic Trumpian approach, because what they're doing is, it must be okay because I'm saying it out loud. And how else would it not be? I mean, you see what he's going through there. Well, you do this thing, and then you send it back to the states, and they decertify the election. As you said, that you can't. That's not the Constitution. That's not the statute law. That's not anything. That's just saying step by step how you try to overturn the election. But the thing is, so far, to a great extent, this has worked for Trump. And it's worked for many of his deputies. You even see that, there was another breaking development this afternoon where the National Archives have asked the Department of Justice to examine this question of what was President Trump doing with all these presidential records, whether it was trying to destroy them in real time or ship 15 boxes down to of, in previous administrations, there have been some questions at the margins. Well, should you have taken that one document, that one gift from a head of state or something like this? Included in these were those letters back and forth between him and the head of the North Korean government. There's no question he was breaking the law, and with what I think is almost demonstrably criminal intent. Or how about when a president is taking records in real time and tearing them up and throwing them in the trash can? I mean, this is so clearly not only violations of this law, but violations of this law with a criminal intent, which is to cover things up.
Who was in on this and when? Navarro under heat recently, but there's also reporting that back in the key days leading up to the insurrection, you had these diehard Trump aides like Mark Meadows, who actually ended up pushing back at the end on some of the more extreme plans, like trying to abuse military power. But this is interesting. We recently learned it was Navarro's team who stayed in on it to the end. So that brings us to the possible co-conspirators in the Oval Office. Consider, for example, a meeting where the road to this military option was actually discussed. Michael Flynn, the former general convicted in the Mueller probe, only got back in to see Trump in those last desperate days because he was led to the Oval Office by one of Peter Navarro's aides. Now, I'll tell you right here, that's odd because Navarro's job did not typically give him that role. But thanks to reporting from the New York Times, we learned there was concern about escorting these liars into the Oval after their guest privileges were revoked by Meadows, who would normally be the one to escort to the Oval Office, but in this case, refused. So Navarro picked up the pieces, basically keeping the plotting alive. That may shed light on who was making that last stand when those measures were thwarted by law, by the courts, and in some way by Mike Pence, who ducked Navarro then. And, of course, all comes full circle. He recently basically rebutted the truly bonkers Navarro-Bannon-Trump conspiracy theory that vice presidents can just cancel elections.
The remedy was for Vice President Pence, as the quarterback in the Green Bay sweep, to remand those votes back to the 6 battleground states.
You say, quote, Pence refused to take my repeated phone calls about election irregularities.
I simply wanted to brief Mike on what I had found.
Why wouldn't he listen to you?
His chief of staff, Mark Short, basically walled off Vice President Pence. The thing about Mike's betrayal of President Trump, which is really interesting, is he never shared the legal analysis of his general counsel.
President Trump is wrong. I had no right to overturn the election.
Joyce, final question. As I mentioned, several parts of this. This is the last one we wanted to get to for your reaction. What all of this yields about that intense pressure to have help on the inside for the coup, which did fail.
Peter Navarro is not a lawyer. He's a trade advisor. He was a snake oil salesman for COVID cures. This is not someone who came up with a plan for stealing an election, for overthrowing an election. He was not an election expert, didn't really understand anything about the nuts and bolts of elections. So he, in many ways, is a gatekeeper at this point. As you say, Mark Meadows has been pushed aside. And where is Peter Navarro getting the plans that are being circulated from? Who knows? But maybe they're coming from some of the Kraken lawyers. So he has a lot of information that he can clarify for the committee if he chooses to. And we're at this fulcrum. You know, as Josh says, we need to know the truth. That's really the most important thing here. And so I take Flannery's point that immunity for congressional witnesses is very dangerous because it can immunize them from prosecution. And that's exactly the point. We don't know what DOJ is doing. We don't know if they're going to make good on Merrick Garland's January 5 promise that they would investigate no matter how high up people went. But if Congress teeters on the edge of giving immunity to a witness like Peter Navarro, I think we'll find out very quickly where DOJ is in all of this. And he plays this critical role there at the end where almost everyone with any sense is out of the way. Most of the guardrails are off. And we're left with Peter Navarro, the snake oil salesman, having his aides take people in to meet with the President of the United States.